The first time Brooke Sullivan asked me for a husband, I was standing in her kitchen with both arms over my head, trying to pull a ceramic serving bowl off a shelf designed for professional basketball players. She had knocked on my door 5 minutes earlier, pointed across the hall toward her apartment, and said she needed a tall person favor, which apparently was how 4 months of being neighbors had qualified me for emergency domestic service. I got the bowl down, handed it to her, and asked, "Need anything else?" Brooke looked at the bowl, then at me, completely straight-faced. "A husband." I stared at her for maybe 2 seconds before asking, "What does the position pay?" The smile that broke across her face told me she had expected embarrassment, not negotiations. My name is Ethan Parker. I was 31, and until that afternoon I had maintained what I considered an excellent relationship with the woman who lived directly across the hall from me. By excellent, I mean we knew each other's names, accepted packages when the other person was out, complained about the elevator, and occasionally spent 10 minutes talking in the hallway when both of us had somewhere else to be. Brooke was 29 and worked as a freelance commercial photographer, which meant she kept strange hours and occasionally left her apartment carrying enough camera equipment to suggest she was documenting a minor war. She was funny without trying too hard, confident without needing the room to notice, and had a dangerous habit of looking directly at you when she said something outrageous. I had noticed all of that. I had also noticed that dating someone whose front door was approximately 11 feet from mine could turn a pleasant apartment into a very expensive hostage situation if things went badly. Brooke leaned one hip against the counter and folded her arms. "You'd like a compensation package before hearing the requirements?" she asked. "I'm 31. I know better than to accept vague employment." She nodded like I had made an excellent point. "Fine. Benefits include coffee, occasional home-cooked meals, and access to a woman who owns 6 different camera lenses but cannot apparently reach her own dishes." I glanced at the cabinet. "Any dental?" "No." "Retirement plan?" "Absolutely not." "Then your recruitment strategy needs work," she laughed, and I had the irritating realization that I liked being the reason for it more than I should have. She picked up the bowl and carried it to the island. "You haven't even heard the qualifications. I'm listening." Brooke lifted one finger. "Must be tall enough for the top shelf." Discriminatory, but continue. Another finger. "Must be able to open jars without making a speech about upper body strength." Reasonable. A third finger. "Should know how to assemble furniture, tolerate terrible reality television, and understand that if I say I'm not hungry, I may still eat 40% of your fries." I nodded thoughtfully. "So you're not looking for a husband, you're looking for a maintenance department with snacks." Her eyes narrowed in amusement. "You seemed promising until that attitude. I haven't even submitted references. That should have been the end of it." Brooke should have laughed. I should have gone back across the hall, and we should have returned to discussing missing packages and whether apartment 5C was secretly running a bowling alley above us. Instead, she watched me for another second and asked, "So you wouldn't apply?" There was enough lightness in her voice to give both of us an exit, but the question underneath it was less casual. I had known Brooke was attractive from the week she moved in, but attraction is easy when nobody asks you to do anything about it. Standing in her kitchen while she looked at me like that made the situation considerably less theoretical. "Depends," I said. "Is there an actual opening, or do you just enjoy interviewing the neighbor?" For the first time since I walked in, Brooke lost her answer for half a beat. She recovered quickly. "Maybe I'm keeping my options open. Smart competitive market." "You sound very confident for a man whose entire application is being tall. I also brought in your package last Tuesday. That was FedEx's job, and yet who delivered?" Brooke pressed her lips together, trying not to smile. I liked that expression even more than the laugh, because it meant I had managed to make her work for the comeback. Finally, she pointed toward the door with exaggerated authority. "You're becoming difficult. I may need to reconsider your candidacy." "That's fine. Call me if the benefits improve." I started toward the hallway before looking back, and Brooke, "Yeah, put the bowl somewhere you can reach it. I'm not giving away husband-level services during the trial period." Her laugh followed me all the way across the hall. I spent the next couple of hours doing normal Saturday things and definitely not replaying the conversation. I answered 2 work emails I should have ignored, cleaned my kitchen, and made the mistake of wondering whether Brooke had planned the husband line before I came over. She was quick enough that she could have invented it on the spot. That explanation was safer, so naturally I chose it. Around 7, I was standing over a skillet deciding whether adding more garlic could rescue a mediocre dinner when someone knocked on my door. I opened it and found Brooke holding a jar of pasta sauce against her chest with both hands. "Emergency," she said. I looked at the jar, then at her. "You own a kitchen towel." Tried it. Run it under hot water. Tried it. Hit the lid with a spoon. Her eyes widened. Violence was my next option. I took the jar from her and twisted the lid. It opened with one sharp pop. Brooke stared at it like I had performed surgery, then took it back and said, "Husband qualification number 2. There it was again, delivered with the same calm little smile. "That seems generous," I said. "Top shelf and jar opening. At this rate, I'll be promoted by Tuesday. Don't get ahead of yourself. There's still an extensive background check." "Good, because I have questions about management." Brooke started backing toward her apartment, still smiling. "You're doing suspiciously well in the interview, Ethan." I leaned against my doorframe. "Then tell me something." She stopped. "What happens if I actually get the job?" For once, Brooke Sullivan had absolutely nothing to say. Brooke recovered from my question about 4 seconds later, which was slow by Brooke's standards, and therefore deeply satisfying. She lifted the jar like it required her full attention, glanced toward her apartment, then looked back at me. "There's a probationary period," she said. "Convenient. Standard procedure. And after probation, performance review. You've really thought this through." She pointed the jar at me. "Good night, Ethan." Then she disappeared across the hall before I could ask another question. I stood there smiling at her closed door long enough to realize I had become exactly the kind of man I usually made fun of, so I went back to my skillet and pretended garlic was still the most important thing happening in my evening. The husband joke should have burned itself out after that. Instead, it became a kind of private scorecard neither of us officially agreed to. 3 mornings later, I met Brooke near the elevators carrying a camera bag, a tripod case, and a cardboard drink tray with 2 coffees balanced against her forearm. I took the tripod without asking before gravity made the decision for us. "Qualification number 3, she said. "Load-bearing capacity. You know professional movers exist. They don't live 11 feet away." I looked at the second coffee. "Is that mine? Maybe? Black, 1 sugar." I stopped walking. "You remembered." Brooke gave me a sideways look. "Don't make it emotional. I'm collecting data." She handed me the cup anyway, and I carried her tripod all the way to the parking garage because apparently I had no respect for trial period boundaries. A few days later, one of her packages was left outside my door by mistake. I texted her, brought it over when she got home, and received another point because I had not opened it. "The bar for husbands in your universe is concerning," I told her. Brooke signed for the imaginary score with her finger in the air. "Respecting male is foundational. So is not deliberately storing dishes above your own reach." That sounds like criticism from an applicant, former applicant. "I'm considering other opportunities." Her smile sharpened. "Are you? Depends on the benefits, still no dental." Then I remain undecided. That became the pattern. She would award a qualification, I would dispute the criteria, and somehow we would end up talking for another 10 minutes. The problem was that I started noticing how often the opportunities appeared. Her loose cabinet hinge had apparently become urgent on a Wednesday evening, even though it had probably been loose for months. She asked whether I knew how to tighten it, then stood beside me holding the screwdriver set while making comment my domestic range. When I finished, she leaned close to inspect the hinge and said, "Competent with tools. Dangerous development." I handed the screwdriver back. "You could have fixed that, probably." "Then why didn't you?" Brooke's eyes met mine for half a second. "Maybe I wanted to see if you could." She smiled immediately afterward, but that answer stayed with me longer than the joke, so I changed the rules. The next morning I knocked on her door holding 2 jackets. Brooke opened it barefoot, hair tied up messily, camera strap still around her neck. "Emergency husband service?" she asked. "No wife evaluation." Her eyebrows went up. "Excuse me?" I held up the jackets. "My mother's birthday dinner is Sunday. I've been informed I dress like a man who purchases clothing during power outages. Pick one." Brooke stared at me, then at the jackets. "This is extremely manipulative. You started a hiring process." "I was evaluating you. Reciprocal workplace." She laughed and pulled me into her apartment by the sleeve. 10 minutes later, she had rejected both jackets, found a third one in my closet after marching across the hall without permission, and informed me that navy made me look less like middle management attending a deposition. I wore the navy one Sunday. After that, I occasionally asked Brooke for things I could have done myself. I asked her to taste a sauce because she had strong opinions about food. I made her help choose flowers for my mother because she claimed men should not be trusted around grocery store bouquets without supervision. Once, I asked whether a new shirt looked decent, and Brooke stared at me for long enough that I had to snap my fingers. "Professional assessment?" I asked. She blinked, annoyingly decent. That sounded personal. It was textile analysis, of course. What surprised me was how quickly she said yes whenever I asked. Brooke had built the game around me being useful to her, but the moment I started making room for her usefulness too, something shifted. It was less like flirting around favors and more like the beginning of a routine. The clearest change happened on a Thursday evening when I got off the elevator and found Brooke coming down the hall with 2 grocery bags cutting into her fingers. "Perfect timing," she said. "Emergency husband consultation." I took 1 bag before she could protest. "Consultation or labor, both." Rates have increased. Inflation, exploitation. She unlocked her apartment and nodded toward the kitchen. Put those on the counter and I'll issue payment in appreciation. I stepped inside, set the bag down, and then picked it back up. Brooke frowned. What are you doing? Renegotiating. Ethan, you keep summoning me for husband duties. Husband privileges should apparently include dinner. She looked genuinely surprised. You want me to cook for you? Absolutely not. I've seen how much takeout arrives here. Rude. I'm cooking. You're helping. Brooke leaned against the counter. That wasn't the arrangement. Exactly. I carried the grocery bag back across the hall to my apartment, and after a second she followed me with the other one, laughing under her breath like she could not decide whether I was annoying or entertaining. 20 minutes later, she was at my kitchen island, chopping peppers badly while I worked on chicken at the stove. Those pieces are different sizes on purpose, I asked. Artistic variation. They'll cook unevenly. Control issue. Knifed issue. She stole a piece of roasted potato from the tray and grinned when I slapped her hand away with a dish towel. We ate at the counter because neither of us bothered moving to the table. Brooke stole food from my plate even though hers contained the same food, which she claimed was scientifically different because mine was already approved by quality control. I eventually caught her reaching for another potato and trapped her wrist lightly against the counter. There are literally 6 on your plate. Yours taste better. That is not how potatoes work. You lack imagination. For a second, neither of us moved. Her wrist was warm beneath my fingers, and the playful expression in her eyes softened just enough to remind me that none of this had really been about groceries for a while. I let her go first. Brooke took the potato anyway, but she was quieter when she ate it. Later, while we cleaned up, she bumped my shoulder with hers and said, "Fine. Husband qualification number 7. Good dinner." I dried a plate and looked at her. "You're still doing that?" "Doing what?" "Evaluating me." "You're doing well." "That's not what I asked." Brooke stopped wiping the counter. I set the plate down. "I like this, Brooke, whatever this is. But I'm not interested in being the guy you call whenever you need something while you get to hide behind a joke." Her expression changed, not wounded, just more attentive. "I'm not using you, I know. I'm saying if this is a game, you have to play too." Brooke held my gaze for a long moment, then nodded once. "Fair." The word came without a joke attached. She picked up her bag, moved toward the door, then looked back at me with the beginning of her usual smile returning. "For the record, you earned another qualification tonight." I leaned against the counter. "And you still haven't answered the important question." "Which one? Is there actually a vacancy?" Brooke opened her mouth, paused, and gave me a look that told me the joke had finally reached somewhere she could not casually talk her way out of. Brooke did not answer the vacancy question that night. She smiled, shook her head like I had somehow violated the spirit of her own game, and went back across the hall with a quiet, "Good night, Ethan." But after that the husband jokes changed. They still appeared, just less automatically. She no longer awarded points every time I carried something heavy or opened a jar, and when she did tease me, there was usually a second where she watched my reaction instead of immediately moving on. I noticed because I had started watching hers too. We were still neighbors, still 2 people with separate doors and separate routines, but it had become difficult to pretend that the space between those doors meant what it had a month earlier. The following Saturday, Brooke caught me checking my mail and asked what I was doing that evening. "Depends," I said. "Is this another unpaid evaluation? Rooftop thing? People from the building? Drinks, food, probably somebody pretending store-bought hummus is homemade. Romantic. I need protection. From hummus, bad sangria, and people who ask what aperture means after I say I'm a photographer." I closed my mailbox. That sounds less like protection and more like social buffering. Husband qualification 8. You're abusing the title. Brooke stepped backward toward her apartment. 7:30. Don't wear the deposition jacket. Then she went inside before I could point out that she had invited me rather than merely informed me. That mattered more than it probably should have. Until then, most of our time together had begun with a favor, an excuse, or one of us already standing in the hallway. This was different. Brooke could have gone upstairs alone. She knew half the building better than I did, and she was capable of making conversation with a parking meter if necessary. At 7:30, I found her waiting outside her apartment in jeans, a fitted black top, and the expression of someone checking whether I had followed instructions. Her eyes moved over my shirt. "Acceptable, I'm relieved. Don't be. There will be continuous assessment." I nodded toward the elevator. "After you, management." The rooftop was crowded without being chaotic. Maybe 20 people spread around folding tables and mismatched patio furniture while somebody's playlist fought with the traffic below. Brooke knew more people than I expected. She moved easily from conversation to conversation, but she kept folding me into them rather than leaving me to fend for myself. When somebody offered drinks, she handed me a beer before I asked. When a guy from the 6th floor trapped us in a story about replacing his dishwasher, Brooke caught my eye over his shoulder and made a tiny circling motion with her finger that clearly meant rescue us. 5 minutes later, when she got cornered by a woman discussing a photography project, Brooke had already declined twice. I stepped in with, "Sorry, I need to steal her for something," and Brooke followed me without asking what the something was. "You're getting disturbingly good at that," she said, once we were near the edge of the roof. "At lying? At knowing when I'm done with a conversation." I took a sip of beer. "You start rubbing your thumbnail against your index finger." She looked down at her hand. "I do not. You're doing it right now because I noticed." Brooke immediately stopped and narrowed her eyes at me. "That information feels invasive. Then develop less obvious escape signals. Maybe I should just tug your sleeve." That would work. The answer came out more naturally than I intended, and something in her expression softened before another neighbor called her name. A few minutes later, Brooke pulled me into a conversation with a couple from the 4th floor. "This is Ethan," she said. "Nothing else. No, my neighbor." No explanation that I lived directly across from her. No safe little label to make my presence obvious. I noticed the omission because she usually explained everybody. The woman smiled at us and asked how long we had been together. Brooke went still beside me. Not dramatically, just enough that I felt the pause before anyone else probably did. I could have rescued her. I could have laughed and said we were only neighbors. Instead, I took a drink and let her answer her own question. Brooke glanced at me once, then back at them. "We're figuring that out." The woman smiled like that answered everything and moved the conversation towards something else. I barely heard the next minute of it. Brooke had said the sentence lightly, but she had said it. Not joking, not he's applying, not don't encourage him. We're figuring that out. When the conversation finally broke apart, Brooke disappeared toward the drink table, and I followed a few seconds later. She poured herself water instead of more sangria. "You could've corrected her," she said without looking at me. "So could you, I know. But you didn't." She set the pitcher down and faced me. "Was that weird? A little bad weird?" "Not really." Brooke exhaled through her nose, then gave me a small smile. Very reassuring review. I leaned against the table. Figuring it out works for me. Her smile faded into something more serious. Yeah, but I'm going to be difficult about one thing." "Only one?" "For tonight." That got a faint laugh. I lowered my voice. "I don't want to be your pretend husband when it's just us and then become nobody the second someone else notices." Brooke's eyes stayed on mine. She did not get defensive, which somehow made the moment feel more exposed. "I wasn't trying to make you nobody. I know, I'm telling you where the line is for me." She looked toward the lights across the roof, then back at the cup in her hands. "The joke was easier when I thought you'd laugh, do the favor, and go back across the hall." "Did you want me to at first?" She thought about it. "Maybe it was safe. And now?" Brooke gave me a look that was almost annoyed, but mostly because I had asked the exact question she had been avoiding. "Now you keep answering back. That sounds like a complaint." "It is. You were much easier when I thought you were just polite. Tragic." She smiled, then bumped her shoulder against mine. Neither of us moved away. For a while we stood there watching the city, close enough that our arms touched occasionally whenever someone squeezed past behind us. Nothing dramatic happened. That was what made it feel different. There was no favor to complete and no joke that needed a punchline. Brooke had invited me because she wanted me there, and when somebody gave us a label, she had chosen not to erase it. We left earlier than most people. In the elevator, Brooke leaned against the wall beside me and watched the floor numbers change. "Ethan?" "Yeah?" She was quiet for another second. "What would you do if I stopped joking about wanting a husband?" I turned toward her. The doors opened on our floor before I answered, but neither of us stepped out immediately. "Then I'd probably ask what you actually want." Brooke looked at me, and the teasing expression she usually reached for never came. The elevator started beeping impatiently, so we finally walked into the hallway together, toward two doors that suddenly felt much less separate than they had before. For the next 4 days, Brooke did something more distracting than flirting with me. She stopped. Not completely. We still said good morning when our doors opened at the same time, still rode the elevator together twice. Still traded comments about the guy in 5C apparently rebuilding his entire apartment with a hammer after midnight. But the husband jokes disappeared. No qualifications, no imaginary interview, no comments about my probationary status. The absence bothered me more than the jokes ever had, because now every ordinary conversation felt like both of us were deliberately walking around the thing we had finally admitted existed. I could have knocked on her door with some invented reason to see her. I considered it more than once, but if I did that, we would be right back where we started, manufacturing practical excuses because saying what we wanted felt riskier. Friday evening, I had just changed out of work clothes when someone knocked. Brooke stood outside my door wearing dark jeans, ankle boots, and a green blouse I had never seen before. Her hair was down and she had small gold earrings that moved when she shifted her weight. More importantly, she was empty-handed. No jar, no package, no loose cabinet part. I leaned against the doorframe and looked pointedly at both of her hands. This is concerning. Brooke glanced down. What is? You brought nothing for me to open, carry, fix, reach, or inspect. Maybe I'm expanding your responsibilities. Dangerous. I charge extra after 6. She smiled, but it did not have her usual effortless confidence behind it. I waited. Brooke inhaled once, glanced across the hall toward her apartment, then looked back at me. I don't need anything. That stopped me. Okay, she pressed her lips together for a second, clearly irritated by how much harder the next part was than the opening line about needing a husband had ever been. I just wanted you. There was no joke after it, no grin that gave her somewhere to retreat. She simply stood there and let the sentence stay between us. My first instinct was to say something clever, because clever was easier for both of us. Instead, I grabbed my jacket from the hook beside the door. All right. Brooke blinked. All right, where are we going? I don't know. You came over dressed like that with no plan, apparently. This is reckless behavior for a woman with such strict hiring standards. That finally pulled a real laugh from her. She admitted in the elevator that asking me to come somewhere had been the entire plan. Everything after that had apparently been left to fate, which Brooke usually considered an unacceptable project manager. I drove us to a small neighborhood place 10 minutes away that served burgers, local beer, and fries good enough to justify Brooke stealing mine. It was somewhere I actually liked, not somewhere chosen because I was trying to impress her. That seemed important. She slid into the booth opposite me and looked around. This is where you bring all the finalists? Only candidates with advanced JAR credentials. I knew there were other women. The turnover is brutal. Brooke kicked my shoe lightly beneath the table, and the familiarity of it loosened something in both of us. Without the husband joke doing all the work, our conversation felt different. Not heavier, just less protected. Brooke told me about a photography contract she had turned down because the client wanted 3 weeks of travel with almost no notice. I told her my mother had approved the navy jacket and asked who had chosen it, which Brooke accepted as proof that her influence was now entering my family system. We argued over whether pickles improved burgers, whether anyone actually enjoyed networking events, and why Brooke owned a camera worth more than my first car, but refused to replace a toaster that only worked if she held the lever down with a spoon. The attraction was still there, but now it sat beside something steadier. We already knew how to make each other laugh. What I was learning was how easy it felt to keep talking when neither of us needed a punchline. After dinner, we walked instead of going straight back to the car. Brooke hooked her thumbs into the pockets of her jacket and stayed close enough that our shoulders occasionally touched. At a crosswalk, she looked over at me and said, "You haven't asked." "Asked what?" "Whether tonight counts as wife qualification number whatever." I retired the scoring system. Really, too much paperwork. Brooke smiled, but her eyes searched my face. "So I'm no longer being evaluated?" "You never really were." She looked forward again. "That's annoyingly sweet. Don't tell anyone. I have a reputation for operational efficiency." Her hand brushed mine as we crossed the street. The second time it happened, neither of us could blame walking geometry. I turned my palm slightly, and Brooke slipped her fingers through mine without looking at me. We kept holding hands until we reached the car. It was the least dramatic physical thing we had done, and somehow it felt more intimate than every kitchen joke that had come before it. On the drive back, Brooke rested her elbow against the door and watched the city pass. "You know what's strange?" she asked. "Statistically, many things." I thought saying outrageous stuff was supposed to be the brave part. Like asking your neighbor for a husband? Exactly. She smiled faintly. That was easy. I could always say I was kidding. Tonight was harder. I knew what she meant. Saying something bold was not necessarily the same as risking a real answer. When we got back to our floor, neither of us reached for our doors immediately. Brooke stood between them, almost exactly where we had spent months ending conversations because there was always a convenient point where one of us could say goodnight and disappear. She tilted her head. "So husband material?" I smiled, but I did not let the joke carry us away again. "Brooke." She knew from my tone. Her smile faded slowly. "What? Do you want the joke or do you want me?" There it was, not elegant, not especially romantic, but clear enough that neither of us could hide inside it. Brooke looked at me for several seconds. Her eyes dropped briefly to our hands, still linked between us, then came back to mine. "You," she said. "No teasing, no qualification number, just the answer." My chest tightened with the kind of relief that made me realize how much I had needed to hear it. I stepped closer, but Brooke squeezed my hand before I could do anything else. "But saying that here is the easy part now." I frowned slightly. She glanced at her apartment door, then mine. "Tomorrow morning we still live 11 feet apart. We still have separate routines. We can still wake up and pretend this was a nice date that got a little serious." Her thumb moved once over my knuckles. "I don't want to do that. I just don't know yet what changing it actually looks like." That was the first time Brooke had given me the truth without dressing it up first. I could have kissed her and treated that as the answer. I wanted to. Instead, I lifted our joined hands slightly and said, "Then maybe tomorrow we stop pretending the hallway is a reset button." Brooke's smile returned, smaller and warmer than the ones she used when she was trying to win. She nodded once. For the first time since the top shelf, neither of us needed a joke to understand what came next. The next morning, Brooke proved she had meant what she said by knocking on my door at 8:15 with 2 coffees and absolutely no emergency. She did not ask me to fix anything, carry anything, or reach anything. She just handed me the black coffee with 1 sugar and said, "Breakfast?" I looked across the hall at her open apartment door. "Is this another evaluation? No score today. That serious?" Brooke took a sip of her coffee. Terrifying, honestly. I followed her inside. It was such a small thing, walking across that hallway without an excuse. But after weeks of inventing reasons to end up in each other's apartments, doing it honestly felt almost indecent. Brooke was making eggs while I cut fruit at the counter when I noticed the ceramic serving bowl from the first afternoon sitting on a low open shelf beside the refrigerator. I stopped cutting. "Wait." Brooke glanced over her shoulder. "What?" I pointed with the knife. "That bowl." She followed my gaze, then immediately became interested in the eggs. "What about it?" "You moved it. Apparently, to a shelf you can reach." Brooke turned off the burner and gave me the cautious smile of someone who had just realized a witness had found evidence. I set the knife down. "How long has it been there?" "A while." "Define a while." "Ethan." "Brooke," she sighed. "Since the week after you got it down for me." I stared at her. "That was almost a month ago, I know. So the top shelf emergency was solved, technically. And the jar?" Brooke suddenly became fascinated by putting eggs onto plates. "The jar was difficult." "How difficult?" "Moderately." "Did you actually try the hot water?" Silence. I laughed. "You did not." Brooke placed my plate down a little harder than necessary. "I was creating opportunities." "You manufactured husband emergencies." "That sounds manipulative when you say it like that. How should I say it?" She folded her arms. "Romantically resourceful." I laughed again, and Brooke tried to look offended before giving up and laughing with me. I started counting on my fingers. The cabinet hinge? Actually loose. The tripod? Actually heavy. The groceries? She hesitated. "I may have taken 2 bags instead of 1 because I knew you usually got home around 6. I put a hand over my heart. Premeditated grocery weakness. I liked seeing you." The joke disappeared so quickly that I stopped smiling. Brooke looked down at the counter and added, "After the first couple of times, I knew I didn't really need help. I just didn't know how to knock on your door and say I wanted 10 minutes with you." I moved around the island until I was standing in front of her. For the record, I figured that out somewhere around cabinet hinge night. Her head snapped up. "You knew? You own a full toolkit. You saw that?" It was sitting 3 feet away while I used mine. Brooke covered her face with both hands. "I'm moving." Across the hall, different state. I gently pulled one of her hands away. I kept coming over anyway. She looked at me between her fingers. "Why didn't you call me out?" "Because I wanted you to keep asking." That brought her hands down. I shrugged. "I just didn't want to be the only one doing the choosing forever." Brooke's expression softened. "You weren't. I know that now." I touched her fingers and she curled them around mine. The moment could have ended with a kiss. A month earlier, I probably would have thought that was the answer. Instead, Brooke suddenly let go, walked toward a drawer beside the refrigerator, and came back holding a key on a plain silver ring. "I was going to give you this next week," she said. "I have a 3-day shoot in Santa Fe, and I was going to ask if you could check on the apartment." I took the key but did not close my hand around it yet. That sounds suspiciously like another husband duty. It was. Brooke stepped closer. "But I don't want to give it to you because I need somebody to water a plant or make sure my freezer hasn't died. I want you to have it because I want you in my life without requiring an emergency first." Her confidence wavered after she said it, just enough to make the words feel even more real. I looked at the key, then at Brooke. "Stay here." "Where are you going?" 11 feet. I crossed the hallway, grabbed my own spare from the small bowl near my door, and came back before she could decide I had lost my mind. I placed it in her palm and closed her fingers over it. "Then this goes both ways." Brooke stared at my hand over hers. "You're giving me your key?" "Reciprocal workplace." She laughed softly. "That phrase does not mean what you think it means." "Too late, policy approved." She looked at the 2 keys in our hands, then up at me, and the expression on her face was so open that I finally stopped trying to make the moment safer. I kissed her. Not because a kiss would define whatever we had become, but because for the first time there was nothing left to pretend around it. Brooke's hand caught lightly at the front of my shirt and pulled me closer, and mine settled at her waist. The kiss started soft, then she smiled against my mouth when I almost bumped the counter behind her. "Careful," she murmured. "Husband qualification number 8, spatial awareness." I laughed against her lips. "I thought scoring was retired. Temporary reinstatement, corrupt management. You knew the risks when you applied." Then she kissed me again before I could negotiate benefits. We did not merge our apartments, buy matching towels, or suddenly start acting like we had been together for years. Brooke still worked strange hours. I still preferred knowing what dinner was going to be before 6. Some nights she slept at my place. Some nights I ended up at hers. And sometimes we simply kissed goodnight in the hallway and closed separate doors, because being together did not require turning every evening into a statement. The real difference was simpler. She stopped inventing broken things, and I stopped pretending I needed a reason to knock. Her spare key lived on my ring. Mine lived on hers. A few weeks later, I was in Brooke's kitchen while she searched for a platter before friends came over. She reached toward the original top shelf, paused dramatically, then looked at me. "Ethan? No, I haven't even asked." The husband position sounded suspiciously permanent. Brooke smiled, walked over instead of reaching for the shelf, and hooked 2 fingers into the front of my shirt. "You're still on probation." "How long is probation? I'll let you know." Then she pulled me down and kissed me, leaving the platter exactly where it was. Looking back, the funny part was never that Brooke jokingly asked me for a husband while I stood in her kitchen. It was how long both of us kept inventing reasons to be needed when what we actually wanted was much simpler. Eventually, we stopped knocking because something was wrong and started knocking because the person on the other side was the reason.
That final image makes the whole progression easier to see because Ethan and Brooke's relationship started with a joke that gave both of them somewhere safe to hide. She asked for a husband after Ethan reached a goal she could not easily get, then kept turning ordinary favors into imaginary husband qualifications. At first, Ethan played along because the banter was easy and the attraction could stay hypothetical, which mattered when the woman he liked lived only 11 feet from his door. But the more often Brooke found reasons to knock, the harder it became to believe those reasons were really about jars, packages, cabinet hinges, or groceries. The turning point came when Ethan stopped accepting the role of useful neighbor and began making Brooke participate too. He asked for her opinion on clothes, flowers, food, and small parts of his own life, so the game became reciprocal instead of one-sided. Their time together slowly changed from favors into routines, and the rooftop gathering made that change impossible to ignore. When another couple assumed they were together, Brooke did not rush to correct them. She said they were figuring it out, and Ethan made clear that he was willing to figure it out with her, but not if he only existed as a pretend husband when nobody else was paying attention. That forced Brooke to confront the part of the joke she had been using as protection. For several days, she stopped flirting entirely, then finally came to Ethan's door without an object to fix or a problem to solve. She admitted that she did not need anything, she simply wanted him. Their first real date mattered because neither of them could pretend it had happened by accident. By the end of the night, Ethan asked the question that had been underneath every joke from the beginning. Did she want the joke or did she want him? Brooke chose him, but she was also honest that living across the hall meant they could still wake up and retreat into their old routines if they were not careful. The next morning proved they were not going to do that. Brooke invited him over for breakfast without inventing an emergency, and Ethan discovered that several of her earlier problems had been deliberately arranged because she wanted excuses to see him. Instead of being angry, he admitted he had noticed and kept showing up because he wanted the same thing. When Brooke gave him a spare key and explained that she wanted him in her life without needing a crisis first, Ethan gave her his key in return. That was the clearest version of what their relationship had become. Not 2 neighbors manufacturing reasons to cross the hallway, but 2 people openly choosing to let each other in. By the time the top shelf joke returned weeks later, it was no longer a shield. It was simply part of the history they had built together. What makes Ethan and Brooke's story work is that the real obstacle was never distance, timing, or another person. They lived almost absurdly close to each other. The obstacle was the difference between creating an excuse for connection and actually admitting you want the connection itself. Brooke could say something as bold as a husband because she could always retreat into humor if Ethan did not respond the way she hoped. Oddly enough, telling him, "I just wanted you," required much more courage because there was no joke protecting her from the answer. Ethan's response is important too. He did not reject the playful dynamic, but he eventually refused to let it become the only way they related to each other. When he told Brooke that he did not want to be the person she called only when she needed something, he was not demanding a label. He was asking for reciprocity. That distinction kept the romance from becoming one person chasing while the other controlled the distance. The spare keys are probably the strongest symbol in the story because they turn the original premise inside out. At the beginning, Brooke invented problems so Ethan would have a reason to enter her apartment. By the end, both of them had permission to enter each other's space without manufacturing a reason at all. The relationship became more secure only when being wanted replaced being needed. Brooke could joke about needing a husband long before she could simply admit she wanted Ethan around. Which moment would have convinced you the flirting had become something real? The fake emergencies, the rooftop answer, or the morning she handed him a key? I'm curious where you think the line changed. So leave your take below, and if this kind of slow burn chemistry made you smile, you can support the next story with a like and subscribe.